It is time for Southeastern Rewind's Tell Me More. Hey, y'all, I'm David Sommers with the Tennessee stud Ron Fuller, answering 5 questions from the latest Studcast, now on Ron's new home on YouTube. The 5 questions on this edition of Tell Me More come from Studcast episode number 9. It's called Dynomite. Remember to find Southeastern Rewind on YouTube, subscribe, ring the bell to get reminders on when the greatest stories in wrestling will be dropped on YouTube. And be sure to tell your friends about Southeastern Rewind. Hey, stud man, this thing is getting big. The Southeastern Rewind channel on YouTube is growing like lightning. You just planted the seed for this thing, and it's getting bigger every day. You've created a place for stud fans and Southeastern fans together.
Yeah, that's and I'm add a couple of other little territories to that too. Continental, USA fans. Eventually, all of these Southeastern. Too bad they don't have the Knoxville programs, but we do have the Pensacola shows, and we've got the Continental shows. We got the USA shows. Eventually, they're all going to be on there, man, and in sequence, which is going to make it really great for fans to be able to see it that way. It's pretty exciting. We've got some pretty good stuff going now. We just had the Mac, that really nice exclusive when Mac passed just recently. The Man Who Saved Southeastern, that special, which has been really, really huge as far as the audience. A lot of people have listened to that one and really liked it.
Yeah.
And now we've got the Terry Funk and Dory Funk Jr. Funk Brothers on there, that 27-year-old never before heard, non-edited little interview there for about an hour in length. So we've got some pretty rare stuff, not counting these original Studcast and the Tell Me More shows. So.
Absolutely. All right, and speaking of which, do you want to do 5 more questions on this edition of Tell Me More? You good for that?
Heck yeah, man. Let's do them.
All right, calm down. Okay, here we go.
All right, I'll be all right.
All right, from episode 9, 5 questions. And question number 1, Charles Beauregard is an LSU fan. He says, you worked with a lot of commentators like Gordon Soley, Les Thatcher, Charlie Platt. Did you ever have another commentator that you thought, man, if I open another company and I can get one of my guys, and I can't get one of my guys, rather, I'm going to try to hire this person? Was there anybody like that?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I guess there was, man. That's a great question. I really don't think much about the commentators of the past. But, I was obviously extremely lucky, man, to have some great commentators during my career. Guys that worked with that were just fantastic to work with. And a couple of which, Mr. Beauregard, that you didn't mention there, and you probably didn't know that I knew. And let me just name off a few others that I got to work with. I had the pleasure to work with Lance Russell out of Memphis that did so much. Wow. He not only was a commentator, but he was an influential figure at the entire television station. Right up there close to the president of the actual TV station itself that was airing wrestling. And wow, he was just a phenomenal commentator, had a great voice, was there in that program from the time my dad started. My dad broke him in as a commentator in 1958, and he was there to the very end of it all. Wow. A great commentator, great guy. Another one that I can think of is Larry Matizak in St. Louis that used to do the TVs for Sam Muchnick, and Matizak was great. Wow, young guy, really, really talented. Boy, and he got to watch some great wrestling. Wow, Sam had the world's best. We're coming into St. Louis, and I must have worked probably 25, 30 of Sam's television shows. And sometimes you'd go and work 3 shows at a time. And I remember one day, Dave, working with Terry Funk, Uh, let's see, Johnny Valentine, Terry Funk, and wow, the third name's escaping me right now. All of them Hall of Famers. Oh, Harley, Terry Funk, and Johnny Valentine
Mm-hmm.
in one day on television in St. Louis.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, and that night flew to Tampa and wrestled in an 8-man tag with another Hall of Famer, Dusty Rhodes. So, wow, I've had some experiences, man, that very few. I think that's probably a record in all of wrestling to have wrestled in a 9-hour period of time 4 Hall of Famers.
Yeah. Wow.
So, Larry Matizak, Ed Capral out of Atlanta. When my dad was in Atlanta in 1965, we went there. Ed Capral was the commentator. They were on Channel 11 TV in Atlanta. And Ed was really, really great. Had red hair, pretty big guy, great voice, very knowledgeable about wrestling, super dude. And one of the best in that time. Another one that comes to mind is in Australia, a guy named Michael Cleary. And he was a young guy. He was a huge star in Australia, in Australian football. He was one of the only guys in the history of the sport to you couldn't block over there, so that style of football they played. So when they kicked off to you, everybody could tackle you, and you didn't have anybody could block for you. It was pretty crazy the way that game was designed. But Cleary is the only guy in Australian history, I think. Probably now that may not be the case, but back in those days, to run one all the way back against 11 guys.
Wow. Okay.
And no blockers.
Right. No blocking.
No blockers. That's a phenomenal feat.
What the hell did they do?
He got to be a great friend of mine.
Yeah.
We used to party. Used to go out and have the drinks. In Australia, everybody drank like crazy, and I was fairly popular. Some people recognized me, but when we went into the pubs, it was everybody knew him. He was a national star. He went on to become what's akin to a senator in the United States.
Oh, okay, politician. Okay,
big time politician, professor, and everything else. Man, really.
Okay, but wait. If the lineman didn't block, what the hell did they do? Just stand there?
No, they kind of run along behind the guy.
When he
gets tackled, he goes down on the ground. They start to kicking the ball back, and moving the ball back to his players, and then then they can tackle each other at that point. They're all just and they get in these big scrums and these big piles, and it's like it was a kind of a cross between rugby and they called it Australian football, and they had no pads. Oh, it was crazy, man. I was like, God, these guys are going to kill each other.
Well,
it's a pretty interesting game to watch. I really, really enjoyed watching those games.
Well, may Australian football stay in Australia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I got one other guy, that worked with me, and he's a young kid, and he was in Pensacola with me. He set in with Charlie Platt probably in the years of, say, 83, 84, maybe even 85. Yeah. His name was Rick Stewart.
Yeah.
A young guy, blonde-haired, really talented. And really, really had a great future ahead of him as a commentator. And when he left and moved upward, he did. He worked in some great territories. He made a pretty good name for himself. So I've kind of had experience with a whole lot of guys that Mr. Beauregard wasn't knowledgeable about, and I don't blame him. He probably doesn't know I worked a lot in St. Louis and Australia and all those places. But there's two guys, David, I would have loved to work with.
Oh, interesting. Who would that be?
Jim Ross.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Out of Oklahoma and Mid-South Wrestling. Wow. In WWE, he went on to be a huge commentator for
Hall of Famer.
WWE,
Yeah.
along with the Jerry Lawler.
Yep.
So
for sure.
He's been around for a long time, and then the other one worked for WWE, WCW. He worked up there for Vern Gagne, Mean Gene Okerlund.
Oh yeah, wow! You don't get a bigger name in commentating, and what a fun guy. Gene Okerlund made us laugh so many times. Wow.
Oh yeah. In fact, I just happened to be watching something on the computer today, and it was old outtakes from Gene's interviews.
Yeah, there are some on YouTube. Yeah, that are kind of adult rated, but there are some funny ones on YouTube with Mean Gene outtakes. Really good stuff. Yeah.
And what was really odd about it, man, is the first one I saw was with the oh my goodness, man!
I was going to say the Sheik or
Paul Orndorff.
Orndorff. Okay,
They just passed away,
yeah,
man.
Yeah,
and,
wow.
And wow, it was so good. And I saw another one that was with Paul that somebody played. I don't know if you've seen this before, where he comes on like a kids program.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little skinny guy there that makes some smart remark about him. He don't look so wonderful or whatever. And he comes out in his wrestling gear, and then he attacks the kid guy supposedly, and gets him down on the floor. You can't see him, the commentator or the guy on the show, and he's just stomping him back there. And then they have the clothes. He pulls up a shoe and a leg, and the shoe comes off like the guy's foot. He's tore his leg off.
Yeah.
Oh, it was hilarious. I was like, wow, I'd never seen Paul do those type of things. And and we're going to be doing Paul. We're going to be doing a Super Studcast with Paul coming up. Actually, July 27th on a Tuesday. We'll be releasing that tribute to Paul.
Yeah, and, that's going to be Super Studcast number 43. Part 2. Did I get that right? Okay.
Yep, that's it. You're on it, man. You got Mr. Pickles with you today?
He's grazing, just grazing in the grass. That's.
Oh man, you're on it, man. Just like you would Mr. Pickles. So yeah, I hope that's good, Mr. Beauregard. We kind of brought in quite a few commentators in this conversation, and obviously Gordon Soley, Les Thatcher, and Charlie Platt. Just we're all tremendous, man. I was so lucky to have those guys working for my companies.
For sure. Grazing in the grass, it's a gas, baby. Can you dig it? All right, question number 2. Alan Siebes says, in this episode, you talk a lot about your father's farm in Loxley, Alabama, when you and your brother were young and the dangerous things that you had been doing as youngsters. You said you had lots of horses. Can you think of any stories you might not have told about those days?
Gosh, man, that's been that's been about 4 years since I recorded that Studcast.
Mm-hmm.
But I can remember a few stories that pop into my head right out of nowhere, and I got maybe 2 or 3 of them. One of them was my dad. My dad was a pretty tough dude, and he'd been hurt many times in many different ways. Heck, and a lot of his matches with Mario Galento, they were like the really horrendous battles. But I remember as about 10 years old, 11 years old, coming into the house one day, and he's sitting in the kitchen. And he's just bloody all over, man, especially his head. And I say, what's wrong? What happened? And he's got a big towel, and he's got it on the back of his head. And he said, well, that horse, we had one horse that was kind of bad about kicking people, trying to kick you. And he said, that horse, and I can't remember the horse's name, but he said, I got in his stall there and I was doing something. And he said, he tried to kick me. And he said, I jumped back real fast. And he said, there was a 2x4 that was sticking out of the ceiling area, up close to the ceiling. And he said, just bang, that 2x4 cut me, gashed me in the
Oh,
top of the head.
wow.
And I was like, just listening to it, I was like, oh God, man, that had to hurt. I didn't say that to him,
Yeah.
but he wasn't making a big deal out of it. He just, he got one towel full of blood, and he got a second towel, and and I assumed he was going to have to go have stitches, and I don't know whether he did or didn't. I guess he probably told me, hey, you need to get out of here, go to work, get outside there and mow the lawn or whatever job he could think of. But that was a horse situation. We had some bad horses. I also remember that we had some quarter horses, and other people around us had great quarter horses too, and they would bring them down to our farm.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a long road on the farm from the Highway 90 that went between Mobile and Pensacola.
Yeah.
There was a big dirt road that went back to the back of the property, and it was probably a half a mile long. But we used to race those horses. The guys would bring trailers, and they'd sometimes bring two horses, one horse, whatever. And then Dad would go. He'd have me go get. We had a couple of really fast horses, and we'd bring them up to the. And then we had a little track laid out. Here's where you start, and a quarter of a mile down there, that's the finish. And so, they'd have the guys that came would be bigger guys. They'd be grown guys, and they'd have saddles on and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd get on their horse, and then Dad would boost me up, and I would ride our horse, no saddle, and an 80-pound, 90-pound kid, right? Bareback, right?
Right.
And they would go, hey, wait a minute, this ain't fair, the kid don't weigh 100 pounds, and, you got no saddle. This isn't right, Hey, he says, well, it's a horse race, ain't it? So I used to race them. I used to run those horses for a quarter of a mile.
So you would just basically have a handful of mane, and that's it.
Oh, yeah.
That's it.
And a big handful, too, man.
Yeah,
Two handfuls of mane.
Yeah.
Because you really didn't have to. The horse knew exactly what was going on.
Right,
you didn't really have to steer
right.
him. He just they said go, and boy, here we went, right?
Yeah.
And I remember, Dave, I don't know if you've ever ridden a horse.
Mm-hmm.
Probably 40, 50 miles an hour. Gosh, those horses could run. And thank God it was only a quarter of a mile, not like the big tracks that have a mile or more, but that the quarter of a mile was just all I could take. Man, I was just hanging on for dear life, man. Yeah. I knew that if I took a bump, it was going to be bad.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Was it like being on a dirt road? What was it? You say the course or the track? What was it like?
Yeah, it was dirt. It was
dirt road.
Dirt road. It was a dirt road, and if it had rained, if you got behind, you're going to get it in your face and all over your body, and for somebody 10, 11 years old, it's a pretty pretty tough deal to stay on a down horse that's running full speed, man, and you ain't got nothing but some mane to grab a hold to. Like you said, you don't got much. You got your legs all clamped on there as hard as you can.
Yeah.
and praying that you get the end of that road down there into the quarter of a mile in one piece.
Yeah.
And then that brings to mind, now this one's pretty far out, I think in this episode number 9, I talked a lot about the Fields brothers, Bobby, Don, and Lee, who were famous wrestlers back in those days too. And they bought the territory from my dad, and they bought that farm that we lived on from my dad when we left there. And they had Cadillacs, and this was about 1960. You remember the old Cadillacs, Dave, that had the sharp fins on the back?
Yeah, and at some point, didn't they outlaw sharp fins like that on all vehicles, not just Cadillacs?
I don't know whether they did or not. I don't
Yeah.
think it was only about 2 or 3 years, maybe 58,
Mm-hmm.
59,
Mm-hmm.
1960, somewhere in that time frame. They had these sharp fins on the backs of Cadillac.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And now, the Fields boys were crazy boys. They were kind of goofy, man, at times, and they had a horse, one of the horses, and they were running that horse, and they were chasing the car, a Cadillac, you know. And I don't know how the heck that all started. And I was just a big kid, and I remember seeing it happen. That whoever was driving the Cadillac and the other one was riding the horse, just put on the brakes and the horse ran right up on that fin.
Oh boy.
It
Yeah.
killed the horse
Oh my
right,
God. Yeah.
right there. Bam. I mean, the horse went down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whichever one of the Fields boys went over the top of the car,
Oh God.
never touched the Cadillac and landed out in front of it. Uh, it is like, oh, it was a terrible, terrible deal.
Oh wow. Did you see that happen?
Oh, yes.
Oh
Yes,
God.
I did. I happened to be there, man. And those guys were crazy. I think I may talked about it in this episode in number 9 with the dynamite. Dad was doing a lot of dynamite back in those
Uh-huh.
days.
Yeah.
And he would take a bulldozer and dig these big trenches around the stumps
Uh-huh.
so that he could get down real deep with the dynamite, auger into the stump, and then put 2 or 3 sticks of dynamite in those stumps, put a short fuse on there.
Good God.
Yeah, and then one day the Fields brothers were there, and
Uh-huh.
all 3 of them. And he said, "Come on, you see what I'm going to do." And he took it down there, and they got in the little trench, and they were watching the whole process. And then when he cut the fuse, I knew we'd been doing a lot of dynamite. And I asked him, I said, "Dad, that's a short fuse, man." And he goes, "Oh, it'll be all right. It'll be all right." And then he lit the fuse. And when he did, man, I knew it was a short fuse. I took off, man. I was like, "Hey, this thing's going to go pretty quick." And Dad did too, And then we ran a little ways, and I turned around and looked, and the Fields brothers was fighting each other in the pit with the down stump and the dynamite,
Oh my God.
dragging each other back into the pit. Right?
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, Dad, they're gonna die. They're gonna die." And he finally screamed at him. He said, "It's gonna go. It's gonna go." And then they took off. And one of them, I remember when the stump blew. And if you're ever around dynamite, there's always a concussion there. There's like the air almost runs away and then boom, it comes back, you know. And when that concussion, that stump, it blew that stump probably, I'd say at least 100 yards in the air. And that's probably 3,000-pound stump. And then the Fields boys, the last one, the one that was furthest behind, the closest to the stump, it blew him a flip, turned him upside down all the way over. He
Wow.
landed on his face and turned his body all the way.
Wow.
So those guys were crazy dudes, and so kind of cover a little more than just just the horses, but wow.
Yeah, I think you covered that one. And while you're on the subject of dynamite, Beverly Byers, question number 3 wants to know, this Studcast was named Dynamite. A lot of stories about your father's enjoyment of blowing things up. How long did he continue that fondness of dynamite?
Good question, Beverly. I can tell you, he didn't stop in 1958 when we left there. We didn't do any dynamiting for quite a while, though, probably until 62, 63. We had a big old farm in Potts Camp, Mississippi, about 60 miles outside Memphis in the northwestern part of Mississippi. And we had a lake on that farm, and it was full of water moccasins. Wow, big old boys, man.
Oh, wow.
Scary, scary snakes. And so Dad got the word around. He says to people, he says, "I'm going to blow the dam on that lake." And before he blew the dam, he put this fence across the front side of the dam. He blew the back of the dam out, but the fence across the front side of it was like a triple three big layers of chicken wire.
Mm-hmm.
so that when the water blew the dam, when the dam blew, the water was going to flow through there real fast, but it
Yeah.
was going to catch all those big old water moccas.
Like a big filter. Okay.
There you go,
Yeah.
filtered out. And
Yeah.
what it filtered out was these big, huge water moccas.
Good God.
And I remember the dam had probably 15 guys that he had invited over, and they all had their guns. And once the water blew and the water rushed through there, then they ran down there, and boy, they started popping those snakes. I bet they shot for an hour and a half before they got them all.
That was a big time in Loxley, Alabama.
Oh yeah. Now this was Potts Camp, Mississippi. This was
Okay.
a little
Okay.
further north. We'd
Okay.
moved out of Alabama, and we'd been into
Okay.
Memphis some, and
All right.
we were kind of living just outside Memphis. But yeah, this so Dad still had his fireworks and his and his dynamite going. And then later on, when we moved to Atlanta, finally about 1965, we moved outside of Atlanta into a little small town called Locust Grove, Georgia. It was about 30 miles, 40 miles south of Atlanta, and it had a real nice place to build a dam. So Dad he loved to build these lakes, so he took his dozer and he built the big lake there, and we cut down a lot of the trees uh, to make the lake, and then we blow the stumps. So he wanted to get rid of the stumps too. So all of a sudden, after years of no dynamiting, we went back in the dynamite business. We were buying dynamite by the cases, and dynamite. People don't know much about the stick itself. The stick itself is not real dangerous unless there's some concussion that would set it off, right? So the really deadly part and the most dangerous part of handling dynamite is the cap. Now the cap's where that's where you stick the fuse in. You crimp the little edge of the cap, and then you stick that cap into the dynamite. And so when we were dynamiting, my dad would always carry the stick, which wasn't dangerous, and he'd have me or Rob carry the big box of caps.
Okay. The caps. Now correct me if I'm wrong. The caps were kind of the most dangerous part because that was the part that would cause the bang.
Explode. That's what they would do.
And then
they would explode.
And then set off the stick.
There you go. That little explosion in the cap set off the stick.
Right.
But if you had a whole box of caps, you might have 50 caps in one box, and you were to fall down, they're all going to explode.
Yeah.
And then you're gone.
Yeah.
There's enough explosion there that if you ain't gone, you ain't never going to be right again. But I always wondered about my dad. There was another one of those things that my mom would have said, "You're going to kill them boys."
That kind of explains a lot, Ron. Okay. All right. Question 4. Mark Frazier says, you talked about your father getting wrestling started in Louisiana with Gulf Coast Wrestling in the early 1950s. Was there anyone already running wrestling there? And if not, how did he go about starting something like that from scratch?
Oh, geez, that's a good question, Mr. Frazier. I'll tell you, I don't really, I was only, back in those days, I was probably only about 8 years old or so. So I really didn't get to ride a lot with Dad like I did with Roy in certain time frames. So I don't know much about his territory. I do know that he established everything from basically about Tallahassee all the way over into Louisiana. New Orleans, he was running New Orleans and Alexandria and several cities in Louisiana. He ran everything along the Gulf Coast like Biloxi, Mobile, Pensacola, Panama City, all of those cities along there. And then he ran northward, he ran Dothan, was one of the towns. He ran Montgomery, and some cities in a little bit in the northern areas of the state of Mississippi. So so, and I don't know really how he got started over there, whether there had been anybody there before him or not, but I know that Dad had a connection with the Channel 5, I think was the name of the TV, the call letter. I don't know what the call letters were, but it was the channel number. Channel 5 in Mobile, big station in Mobile, had a president, or the CEO there was a guy named C.P. Persons. And the reason I remember this name is because C.P. Persons is kind of like where we are in Southeastern, where we got these phenomenal ratings, and the guys that own those stations, or the managers of those stations, got so high on wrestling that they would just. So Dad, the C.P. Persons, they put this show on Mobile in '54, and by '55 and '56 they've got this absolutely phenomenal ratings. And so Dad went to CP Persons and he says, CP, I want to go into, as an example, New Orleans.
Hmm.
And there's channel such and such there. And can you call and talk to that television station's big people and tell them what my wrestling show does?
Mm-hmm.
Basically,
Yeah.
he had a guy that was going to get him towns, get him on TVs.
Right.
Once you got the TV, you basically had the town, because nobody else is on TV back in those days. So CP Persons was still in business when I came to Pensacola in 1978. He was still at the same channel, and I went to see CP, and I showed him my numbers from Knoxville, that 80%, 80 share, and all those crazy numbers. And he was like, God, he goes, geez, boy, your numbers are bigger than your dad's, I go, well, yeah. So he helped me get started when I went to Pensacola. I mean, and I set up there was no TV. They had lost their TV in Mobile, and he saw my numbers and he said, geez, I want your show, kid. I showed him the show too. He had said he watched stuff he had never seen. He saw the instant replays, and he saw all the split screens and the intros and the bumpers between segments, and it was all technical stuff that he had never seen in a wrestling show before. He goes, wow, no wonder you got these numbers, guy. So he helped me, and he helped Dad a lot getting started in Louisiana. So I'm not sure that Dad was the first guy over there, but I know that he did start running over there. He got help from C.P. Persons. There was a commissioner in the state of Louisiana that my dad talked about a lot, a guy named Joe Gunther, who evidently had a real stranglehold on wrestling in Louisiana. If you didn't take care of Joe Gunther, and by taking care of him, I assume that my dad's talking about giving him some bread. You weren't going to run matches in Louisiana. And that was kind of the way wrestling was back in those days. Those athletic commissions, they decided who was going to run towns and who weren't.
Okay. All right. So that last question, Ron, kind of leads us into the last question for the day. Question number 5 comes from Alan Siebes, and he says, was there heat between Leroy McGuirk and the Fields brothers when McGuirk started running Louisiana and Mississippi, or were they relieved that they didn't have to travel over there anymore?
Oh, that's pretty cool. Well, I'll tell you the big difference. Talking about the travel, okay? So Leroy McGuirk is in Oklahoma, okay? The Fields boys are in Mobile, basically, between Mobile and Pensacola. So, and being very familiar with that part of the country, Dave, how much further do you think Leroy's trip was from Oklahoma to New Orleans as compared to Pensacola to New Orleans?
Right. 3 hours versus 12, 15.
Yeah, 12, maybe more.
Yeah,
right?
maybe more. Could be 15, yeah.
Just an astronomical trip from Oklahoma down to about anywhere in Louisiana.
Yeah.
But especially if you go to New Orleans. So I have a feeling that I think what happened is once Dad sold out to the Fields brothers, and he had New Orleans and Louisiana going pretty good, that they lived there in Pensacola, between Pensacola and Mobile, on that big farm, and they were doing good. Mobile was doing good. Pensacola, Panama City, Dothan, they're all of the Alabama cities, the eastern side of Mississippi, towns like Hattiesburg and Laurel, and the little smaller towns like that, Biloxi. Those were their towns, and they got kind of sour on those trips over there to Louisiana, because they were a lot longer than the trips they were accustomed to making. And I think either Leroy bought them out, which probably more than likely, and I don't know this story, but I have a feeling that Leroy probably bought him out. He was that kind of guy. He was a very upstanding guy, about Roy's age, an old timer. And he bought him out, and then Leroy started running Louisiana and parts of Mississippi. Leroy ended up running Jackson and the bigger cities in Mississippi, and the Fields boys just ran the ones that were on the far eastern side of the state. So, so I believe that that's probably how that went down between the Fields and McGuirk. If it wasn't now, and the Fields brothers were still running Louisiana, and Leroy came in there, and let's say had a bigger wallet to pay Joe Gunther with than the Fields brothers, then all of a sudden Louisiana belonged to McGuirk, because Leroy could have bought it. But without having to pay the Fields brothers for it, he could have paid Joe Gunther for it. So that's a strange situation there, man. So the Fields continued to run the eastern side of the state of Mississippi in the smaller cities for many, many years after Leroy got involved in Louisiana.
All right, so good job, Stud. There's another one in the can. 5 more questions, and that's another Southeastern Rewind's Tell Me More, where the Stud answered 5 questions about Studcast number 9, which is now on Ron's new home on YouTube. And that is the original Studcast number 9. Remember to find Southeastern Rewind on YouTube, subscribe, ring the bell to get reminders on when the greatest stories in wrestling will be dropped on YouTube. You ring the bell, then Ron will ring the bell. So be sure to tell your friends about Southeastern Rewind. For Ron Fuller, I'm David Summers, and we'll be back soon with another Tell Me More.